A bone-chilling scream pierces the silence of the Hollywood Hills. It's February 15th, 2020, 1:13 in the morning. The night's tranquility in this affluent Los Angeles neighborhood, where Spanish villas cling to the hillsides, is shattered by a sound the residents will never forget. Michael Herman, sleeping on the ground floor of the three-story house on Mount Street, jolts awake from a light slumber. Later, he would recount every second of that night to investigators with devastating precision. "At first, I thought it was a nightmare," he recalls, "but then I realized the screams weren't getting quieter or weaker. They were becoming more desperate." The Mediterranean-style house, which Amy had recently purchased, had been her dream home. 3 stories, large windows, a sprawling balcony overlooking the city. She loved that view, her mother Penny would later say through tears. She always said she could see the stars at night. On this night, however, the sky is cloudy, the temperatures unusually cool for Los Angeles. Herman, who rented a room on the ground floor, calls upstairs. "Amy!" His voice echoes through the stairwell. Then he hears it, choking sounds, dull thuds, the noise of a struggle. In that moment, I knew this was real. This was actually happening. We were in danger. In his panic, he searches for his phone. It's nowhere to be found. Later, it would be discovered that the intruder had already stolen it. The sounds from upstairs intensify. He hears Amy screaming, "Stop! No! Please!" Then a dull thud. "I had to make an impossible decision," Herman recalls, his voice still trembling at the memory. You realize in that moment that you can only save her by making the decision to leave. Those seconds, they haunt me to this day. He runs to the front door, but the wrought iron gate is locked. In desperation, he climbs over a fence, the sharp metal bars cutting into his hands. The blood on his t-shirt would later lead to hours of interrogation. He knocks at a neighbor's house. No answer. Finally, he finds a passerby with a phone. 1434 Mount Street, his voice cracks on the phone. "Someone is attacking my roommate." The emergency dispatcher tries to calm him. "Sir, stay on the line. Are you safe?" Herman can barely think clearly. I don't know. I had to get out. She needs help." The first patrol cars arrive at 1:23. Officer Sarah Martinez recalls, "Usually in this area, we get calls about loud pool parties or illegally parked cars. When we heard the address, we initially thought it was an exaggerated domestic dispute." What the officers find is a distraught Michael Herman, barefoot, wearing a bloody t-shirt. His fragmented story makes the police suspicious. "He couldn't even tell us which apartment he lived in," Martinez reports. "We initially had to consider that he might be the perpetrator himself." While 2 officers question Herman, others search the property. Officer Rodriguez shines his flashlight into the backyard. The beam catches something unusual between the carefully tended rose bushes. "Dispatch, we need an ambulance immediately," he radios. "Female victim, unconscious, severe injuries." The woman lay crumpled among the roses, her dark hair spread across the mulch. Above, the third-floor balcony loomed against the night sky. From the height and position, it appeared she had fallen, or been pushed, from the terrace. Her body showed signs of the devastating impact with the ground. Time becomes the critical factor. Paramedics fight for the life of 38-year-old Amy Harwick in the pale light of dawn. Detective Scott Masterson, a veteran homicide investigator, arrives at 2 o'clock. The scene initially made no sense, he recalls. Was it a break-in? A relationship drama? An accident? Inside the house, investigators find a disturbing scene. a torn necklace on the stairs, later identified as Amy's favorite piece, a gift from her mother. An overturned purse, its contents scattered across the floor. Bloodstains on the terrace door. And on the third-floor balcony, a mysterious syringe containing a yellowish-brown liquid. Initially, we suspected a drug incident, Masterson admits, but Michael Herman vehemently disagrees. She's sober. She doesn't even drink. She's a therapist. She helps people with addiction problems. When first responders arrived, Amy was still breathing, barely. They rushed her to Cedars-Sinai, where doctors worked desperately to save her life, but the internal injuries were too severe. At 1:59 a.m., Dr. Marcus called the time of death. Protocol required an autopsy due to the suspicious circumstances of her fall and the apparent signs of violence on her body. The case was immediately flagged for investigation. The medical examiners raise further questions. The injuries don't match a simple fall. Strangulation marks on the neck. Defensive wounds on the arms. It looked like she had fought, Dr. Sarah Chen notes in her preliminary report. At 3 in the morning, the news reaches Penny Harwick in Pennsylvania. "Is this a joke?" are her first words. "Tell me this is a sick joke." Her husband Tom can only sit silently beside her as their world collapses. What began as a routine emergency call develops into one of Los Angeles's most sensational murder cases. But to understand the true events, we must go back to the beginning. Back to a little girl with honey-colored curls, adopted by Penny and Tom Harwick. Back to a young woman who dedicated her life to healing others. And back to a fateful encounter that would change everything. When they first placed Amy in our arms, it was like the sun rising, recalls Penny Harwick. It was a cold November morning in 1981, when 11-month-old Amy met her new home in Michigan. The adoption was a gift from heaven for the Harwicks, who had tried unsuccessfully for years to have their own child. "She was so tiny, but her personality was huge," Tom Harwick laughs. "Even as a toddler, she had this certain look, as if she were analyzing the world." The honey-colored curls, which later turned into dark hair, were her trademark. "People always thought we had dyed it," Penny remembers. "But that was just Amy, full of surprises." Early childhood was filled with music and creativity. Amy learned piano, sang in the church choir, and developed a special fondness for the theatrical. At 7, she organized her first therapy session for her dolls. She would arrange the dolls in a circle and have them talk about their feelings, her mother recalls. Maybe that was a sign of her future calling. The family dynamics changed when the Harwicks adopted their son Chris 3 years after Amy. Amy was, well, let's say, not thrilled. Tom smiles. Her first reaction: when is he going back? But initial rivalry evolved into deep sibling love. "She became his greatest protector," says Penny. "If anyone bothered Chris, Amy was there instantly." The teenage years brought a rebellious phase, but one that now fills her parents with pride. Instead of turning to destructive behavior, Amy discovered the alternative scene. Heavy metal became her sanctuary. She transformed her room into a sort of Gothic sanctuary, Chris remembers. Black walls, candles everywhere. Mom was shocked at first. But Amy had a special gift. She could bring people together. "She took me to concerts," Penny recalls. Can you imagine that? A mother in her 50s among all these metalheads? But Amy made it possible. By the end, I knew all the Metallica lyrics. Her natural charisma opened doors. She always managed to get backstage, her brother Chris remembers. Whether it was a local band or big names, Amy found a way. This ability to form connections would later prove invaluable in her therapeutic work. At 20 years old, Amy packed her bags for Los Angeles. The official reason was love. Tommy Decker, a drummer she'd met at a local concert. But her mother, Penny, knew better. L.A. had always been her dream. Tommy might have been the trigger, but he wasn't the real reason. 2001 marked the beginning of a remarkable metamorphosis. Her first marriage to Tommy lasted 3 years, a lesson in self-discovery, as Amy later described it in her private journal. While her first marriage failed, Amy began to flourish. Her early years in L.A. were a kaleidoscope of different careers. As a fire dancer, she performed in the city's hottest clubs. She was hypnotizing, recalls Robert Klin, who met her then. She had this presence. When Amy performed, no one could look away. Simultaneously, she worked as a photographer, specializing in the alternative scene. Her images appeared in underground magazines, documenting a subculture in transition. Modeling came by chance. A photographer saw her at one of her fire shows and became obsessed with her aura, recalls her friend Maria Santos. Amy became the face of several Gothic fashion campaigns. Her distinctive looks, the dark hair, the penetrating eyes, made her a sought-after alternative model. Yet, beneath the surface of these glittering careers, something else was growing. Amy began to take an interest in psychology. She was always a natural therapist, remembers her college friend Sarah Chen. Even as a model or dancer, people would open up to her, tell her their deepest secrets. The study of psychology became her calling. She specialized in trauma therapy and sexual health, earning a doctorate in human sexuality. Her dissertation, Healing Through Understanding, a new approach to trauma and sexuality, won several academic awards. Her own experiences in the entertainment industry made her a unique therapist. She understood the specific challenges faced by artists and entertainers. She spoke their language, says her colleague Dr. Martinez. She knew both sides, the spotlight and the darkness behind it. Her practice in Hollywood became a safe haven for a diverse clientele: sex workers, LGBTQ+ youth, artists on the brink of burnout. She developed innovative therapeutic approaches, combining traditional methods with alternative healing paths. Her book, The New Sex Bible for Women, became a surprising bestseller. She was revolutionary in her approach, recalls her mentor Dr. Sarah Blake. She talked about topics other therapists avoided. She made the taboo accessible. No one would have suspected that a therapy conference in 2009 would seal her fate. Gareth Pursehouse, then an aspiring event photographer and self-proclaimed comedian, was there to document the event. He was charming, in a nerdy way, remembers Rudy Torres, who introduced them that day. Amy liked that about him, that he was different from the typical LA guys. The first months of their relationship seemed perfect. Pursehouse, with his IT background and quirky humor, complemented Amy's artistic soul. She brought color to his life. He gave her structure, recalls Maria Santos. In the beginning, it was like a fairy tale. But beneath the surface, trouble was brewing. The first warning signs were subtle. He began controlling her appointments, criticizing her choice of clothes. It started with small comments, recalls her best friend Jennifer Cooper. That outfit is too revealing for a therapist. Why do you need to work so late? The control became an obsession. Pursehouse secretly installed tracking software on her phone, hacked into her emails. As a professional IT expert, he had the skills to do it. He always knew where she was, who she was talking to, Jennifer remembers. It was eerie. The first physical assault occurred at a house party. Witnesses describe a frightening transformation. In an instant, the charming nerd turned into a raging fury. He grabbed her by the throat, pushed her against the wall, recalls a party guest, all because she had laughed with another man. Police reports from this period paint a disturbing picture: strangulation marks, bruises, a broken wrist. Amy documented everything meticulously, a habit that would later help her in court. She told her parents nothing. "She was so intent on protecting us," her father Tom says today. "We could have helped her." After 2 years of extreme violence, Amy finally secured a restraining order. But the paper offered only illusory safety. Mysterious coincidences began piling up. Her computer was hacked, personal photos disappeared, strange packages appeared at her practice. A particularly insidious attack hit her professionally. Anonymous emails containing old photos from her modeling days were sent to her employers. She lost a job as a youth counselor because of it, recalls her colleague, Dr. Martinez. It was a systematic campaign to destroy her. Healing is not linear. This phrase became Amy's mantra, both in her therapeutic practice and in her personal life. The years after Purse House were a time of transformation. Her practice flourished. Her videos about toxic relationships reached hundreds of thousands on YouTube. She transformed her pain into power, says her colleague, Dr. Sarah Chen. Then Drew Carey entered her life. The beloved host of The Price is Right met her at a party in 2017. She was different, Carey gushes in a later interview. Brilliant, passionate, and she had this special way of making people laugh. Their engagement was announced a year later on his show, a moment that would later take on tragic significance. Drew was good for her, recalls her mother Penny. He respected her work, her independence. But the relationship also thrust Amy further into the spotlight. Paparazzi photos, interviews, red carpet events. She was concerned about the additional attention, says her friend Maria. She often said, "You never know who's watching." The relationship ended in 2019, but Amy and Drew remained friends. "She was one of the most extraordinary people I've ever had the privilege of knowing," Carey says today. In her therapeutic work, Amy increasingly specialized in trauma survivors. Her client, Emily Sears, describes her as a lighthouse in the darkness. Emily didn't know that her therapist had endured similar traumas. "She was so professional," Emily recalls. "She never let on that she was a survivor herself." The fatal turning point came on January 11, 2020. At the X-Biz Awards ceremony, an adult entertainment industry event where Amy was giving a talk on mental health, her path unexpectedly crossed with Purse House. He was working as a photographer for the event. What followed, witnesses describe as disturbing. "He completely broke down," recalls a security guard. "First he cried. Then he became aggressive." For almost an hour, Amy tried to defuse the situation, instinctively drawing on her therapeutic skills. "That was typical Amy," says her friend Jennifer. Even in that moment, she was thinking about helping him, calming him down. What she didn't know, this encounter would reignite a fatal obsession. The weeks following the X-Biz encounter were marked by underlying tension. Amy increased her security measures, installed additional cameras, shared her location permanently with her mother. "She sensed the danger," says Jennifer Cooper. "She knew something wasn't right." Purse House began stalking her online. He analyzed every one of her social media posts, commenting under pseudonyms. His messages grew increasingly desperate. A voicemail from February 1, 2020, reveals his growing obsession. "Amy, please, I've changed. I have so much to explain to you. Please give me a chance." Her therapist colleague, Dr. Martinez, remembers a final conversation. Amy said she felt like she was in one of those thrillers where the audience already knows what's going to happen, but the main character can't see it. A prophetic remark, as it would turn out. On February 13th, 2020, Amy held her last therapy workshop. The topic: recognizing the warning signs. One participant remembers, "She spoke with such intensity about the importance of boundaries and self-protection. Now I know why." Valentine's Day, her last day, began normally. Appointments with clients, lunch with friends, dinner with colleagues in the evening. She was in high spirits, her friend Sarah recalls. She talked about new projects, a planned book about trauma healing. What she didn't know, Pursehouse had been tracking her day meticulously. Surveillance videos show him scouting the area in the afternoon. He wore gloves, carried the syringe with nicotine, evidence of long-term planning. Investigators later reconstructed his method. He waited until Michael Herman fell asleep, broke in through the terrace door, and hid in Amy's bedroom. "The cold-bloodedness is chilling," says Detective Masterson. "He lay in her bed for hours, waiting for her." At 1 o'clock in the morning, Amy came home. Her last text messages to a friend read, "Home now. Had a lovely evening." Minutes later, the fight for survival began. The medical examiner later documented each of her attempts to defend herself. Scratch marks on his arms, a bite wound, pulled out hair. "She fought like a lioness," says Dr. Chen from the forensic team. The strangulation marks on her neck show. He wanted to silence her. The arrest of Gareth Pursehouse, 13 hours after the murder, was both spectacular and bizarre. SWAT teams surrounded his house in Playa del Rey while he tried to present himself as clueless. His acting ability was remarkable, Detective Rodriguez recalls sarcastically. He opened the door in a bathrobe, coffee cup in hand, as if it were just a normal morning. His first reaction to the arrest was captured on police cameras. "Amy? Amy Harwick? Oh yeah, we dated. Years ago. What happened to her?" He explained the black eye and scratches on his arms as an accident while doing home improvements. The evidence was overwhelming. DNA under her fingernails, his glove prints on the balcony railing, the nicotine syringe with his fingerprints. Surveillance videos showed his car repeatedly in her street in the days before the murder. He had literally been hunting her, says prosecutor Rebecca Chen. The trial began in August 2023, more than 3 years after the murder. The courthouse in downtown L.A. became the scene of devastating testimonies. Michael Herman broke down during his testimony. "I hear her screams every night. I keep asking myself, could I have done more?" Purshouse's defense strategy shocked even experienced court reporters. His lawyers tried to portray Amy as emotionally unstable. They brought up old photos from her modeling days, suggested drug use. "A classic perpetrator-victim reversal," comments court reporter Maria Sanchez. "It was disgusting." Penny Harwick's testimony moved the entire courtroom to tears. She brought Amy's first stuffed animal, a worn teddy bear. "This was her protector," she said. "She slept with it until college. Who would have thought that in the end, she had no protector?" Drew Carey sent a written statement. "Amy was a light in this world. She helped people learn to love and heal themselves. Her murder is not just a personal loss, but a loss for all humanity." The jury needed only 4 hours for their verdict: guilty of first-degree murder. When the judge pronounced the life sentence without possibility of parole, Pursehouse showed no remorse. His only comment, "She made me do it." Amy's story doesn't end with her death, says prosecutor Chen. In a way, it's just beginning. The Harwick case catalyzed a movement that fundamentally changed California's legal system. Amy's Law, signed by the governor in September 2020, revolutionized the handling of protection orders. The law now requires courts to actively inform victims of domestic violence about the expiration of their temporary restraining orders and offer extension options, a simple change with far-reaching consequences. If this law had existed earlier, Amy might still be alive, says Penny Harwick. Her restraining order against Pursehouse had expired years earlier without her knowledge. The system failed her. Amy's death also led to an intensive discussion about stalking in the digital age. Her friend Jennifer Cooper founded the Amy Harwick Foundation, which advocates for better protection against cyberstalking. Pursehouse used his IT knowledge to terrorize her. This wasn't analog stalking anymore. It was digital warfare. Today, Amy's practice has been transformed into a counseling center for victims of domestic violence. Her methods live on through her students and colleagues. We see her influence every day, says Dr. Martinez. The way she combined empathy with professional distance, her holistic approach, she was ahead of her time. Her brother, Chris, established a scholarship in her name at the UCLA Psychology Department. It's for students who want to specialize in trauma therapy, he explains. Amy always said education is the key to breaking cycles of violence. The Hollywood Hills house, where she died, stands empty. No one wants to live there, says a neighbor, but on the 15th of every month, flowers appear on the front steps. Red roses, Amy's favorites. No one knows who brings them. Drew Carey dedicated a special episode of The Price is Right to her memory. Instead of the usual prizes, the show donated $1 million to domestic violence organizations. It's what Amy would have wanted, Carey said, to turn pain into purpose. In Michigan, Penny and Tom Harwick have created a memorial garden. Amy loved sunflowers, her mother says. They always turn their faces to the light, just like her. Every summer, they open the garden to the public, sharing Amy's story with visitors.